The onboarding experience for users entering the blockchain ecosystem today has completely changed over the last year. Only recently, Vitalik, the founder of Ethereum, stated that we are not in the early days of crypto anymore, but we are in the early days of crypto being usable. One key element enabling this is embedded wallets. In today's video, we'll have a look at what embedded wallets are and how they work under the hood. I spent quite a lot of time researching this, so if you enjoyed, please remember to hit the like button and subscribe to our new channel, Let's Get On Chain, in case you want to see more content like this. With that in mind, let's dive right into it. Nowadays, users can simply access and interact with their favorite blockchain applications directly through an embedded wallet, instead of being required to have a pre-existing, separately managed wallet. These wallets allow users to authenticate with the blockchain using familiar methods such as social logins, email, or even SMS, thereby completely abstracting away the complexities that arise from private key management. Actually, you may have encountered such an onboarding process with a sign-up model looking like this one and ask yourself, what is going on here? It does seem odd to be able to communicate with the blockchain through a Google account and not encountering any form of private key. Surely there must be some kind of centralized entity who manages my asset in some way. The good news up front, no one has access to your private keys, and only you and no one else ever can trigger any actions on the blockchain. When looking at the bottom part of the sign-up model, you can see a variety of familiar browser extension wallets, like MetaMask here for instance. Selecting any one of those will initiate a sign-in with Ethereum flow. This process involves managing one's private keys and requires the user to have such a wallet set up beforehand. This is the UX as we know it, and nothing really has changed here. What we are interested in when it comes to embedded wallets is this upper part. This looks unfamiliar, especially if you're coming from the blockchain world. You can see a sign up with a Google sign-in or a sign up with an email-based one-time password. Choosing any one of these two methods does not require you to have a pre-existing self-custodial wallet, and hence any familiarity or knowledge about private keys. Instead, once you sign up with one of these methods, an embedded wallet is being created under the hood. Now, I've been saying this word embedded wallet quite a lot, so let's have a look what an embedded wallet actually is. So an embedded wallet really just means that the wallet is built in to the application that the user is about to use, instead of the wallet being a separate application. So the code of the embedded wallet is really integrated into the application's code. The wallet itself, though, is really nothing else than a public-private key pair that represents an account on the blockchain. Very much like when you download MetaMask and you create an account, a public-private key pair is being generated that represents an account. This is very similar. The key difference, though, here is that the concept of private keys is fully being abstracted away from the user. This, of course, kind of bears the question, if the user is unaware and doesn't have access to his private key, somebody must be aware of this private key in some form in order to sign and send transactions on behalf of the user to the network. Well, fortunately, through some clever magic, no one ever has access to the private key and self-custody is fully maintained at all times. Let's see how. So in this video, we'll be looking specifically at Privy, which is one popular embedded wallet service provider, while keeping in mind that there are many others out there and all of them really implement things quite similarly at the end of the day. Mainly, they all use some kind of resource isolation and cryptographic technique in order to make sure that they only ever orchestrate private key generation on the client side while never being able to actually access the private key. In the case of Privy, for example, the private key is being divided into multiple shares using a cryptographic technique called Shamir Secret Sharing. Shamir Secret Sharing allows a secret, in this case the private key, to be split into multiple pieces, such that only a threshold number of these pieces is needed to reconstruct the original private key. For example, in this case, the private key can be divided into 3 pieces, while only 2 of those pieces, and really any 2, for example piece 1 and piece 2, or piece 2 and piece 3, are needed to be able to reconstruct the private key. In case you're actually interested in the math behind Shamir Secret Sharing, it's a mix of polynomials and Lagrange interpolation. But I linked a really good video explaining it in the show notes below. I didn't want to hold up this recording for it, but if you're interested in how it works, pause the video here and check out the video below. Otherwise, let's just move on. Now, in the case of Privy's implementation, the first piece of Shamir Secret Sharing is called the device share. And the device share is stored in local storage of the user's browser. The second piece here, referred to as the auth share, is kept on Privy servers and released once the user successfully authenticates. And finally, here the third piece, referred to as the recovery share, comes into play if the user signs in from a new device and by definition doesn't have access to his initial device share anymore. There are different possibilities with which the user can decide to back up his recovery share, but we'll get back to that later. Now, with those three shares in mind, let's look at how Privy manages to reconstruct the private key in a typical user flow that requires a signature for a transaction on the blockchain. So in the first step, the user initiates an action that necessitates a signature for a transaction on the blockchain, like, for example, swapping one asset for another asset. In this case, the application makes a request to the embedded wallet or the Privy SDK, which is the same, to sign a transaction. The Privy SDK, in turn, then takes this transaction and passes it to what is referred to as an isolated iframe, which exists on a completely separate domain. So an iframe, for those confused, is an HTML element that embeds another HTML document. So in this case, the iframe also operates on a completely separate domain. So think of it as a separate website within the application's website. The beneficial features of an iframe is that it's kind of this sandboxed environment within the application. So it has its own execution context, its own memory, and so on. So next, after receiving the transaction to be signed, the isolated iframe needs to collect at least 2 out of 3 shares in order to be able to reconstruct the private key and then sign the transaction. And it does so by first requesting the device share from local storage. And second, since the user is successfully authenticated, is able to retrieve the auth share from Privy servers. Now, in the last step, using both of these shares that have been retrieved, the private key is being reconstructed and the transaction is being signed with it. Afterwards, the private key is directly erased from memory again, and the transaction is being sent to the blockchain network. So let's recap this now and have a look at a few security implications out of the setup. So it's important to note that Shamir Secret Sharing essentially decentralizes key storage. But once enough shares are collected in order to reconstruct the private key, there's a central point of failure here. And this is very elegantly solved by what we refer to as this isolated iframe. Because this isolated iframe ensures that neither the application nor the Privy SDK or anyone else can ever see or access the private key after it has been reconstructed. What Privy essentially does, as already mentioned, it only orchestrates key shares so that the user can assemble them securely on the client side. So you really need to imagine this iframe as being this isolated, sandboxed environment from the main application. And so it has its own execution context, its memory is completely separate, and the application cannot access the memory of the iframe, neither can the iframe access the memory of the main application. And as mentioned before, the private key is only generated in memory, and after it has been used, it is directly erased again. Now, you might have noticed that when we went through the typical user flow, the recovery share has been completely ignored until now. And that is because this setup represents the user using the application from his initial device. Now, what changes if the user signs in from a new device is that the device share cannot be retrieved because it is a new device. And thus, the recovery share needs to be retrieved instead. So let's have a look at how this recovery share can be retrieved. First off, the recovery share exists in encrypted form on Privy servers. There are 2 methods to manage this encryption. The user can choose to delegate the encryption to Privy, in which case, once the user authenticates successfully on his new device, the recovery share is being released to him. This is obviously the more convenient method, but also implies some trust towards Privy. The second option, the user-controlled encryption, which is highly recommended for any user who expects to hold significant value in his embedded wallet, is to either create a unique password or have a secret that is backed up in the user's cloud storage to encrypt the recovery share with, and hence can be decrypted with again. So in that case, the Privy has only access to the encrypted recovery share and never can see or access the decrypted recovery share. In any case, once the recovery share is being released and decrypted, the user has access again to two shares, the recovery share in decrypted form and the auth share, with which the private key can be reconstructed, like we saw under the first user flow, and actions can be triggered on the blockchain from the new device. So to sum things up, let's have a look at the pros and cons that come along with embedded wallets. With having a look at the pros first. So first of all, we have enhanced security in that no single entity ever has access to the full private key. Neither the application that embeds the wallet or Privy servers ever have access or can see the full private key. Which means that even if Privy's servers, for example, get compromised, the malicious actor would never have access to the full private key. Second, and most importantly, is user convenience. With embedded wallets, users don't need to go through the learning curve of understanding private keys and can get started right away with using their favorite blockchain applications. Finally, we are able to preserve self-custody with embedded wallets while abstracting private keys. And that means here that users have full control of their assets and no third party ever has full control on their assets. However, self-custody is of course a spectrum, because in this case, the user still relies to access his funds on Privy being operating and Privy service not facing any downtime. In case, for example, Privy service would be down, the whole communication to Privy service would not work. As discussed, the recovery share would not be available, the auth share would not be available, and so on. So the user would temporarily not be able to access their funds. However, it is important to note that Privy enables users to, at all times, while being up, of course, to retrieve the full private keys and go full self-custody. So while all this is great, really to onboard the next users to blockchain that are familiar with blockchain technology and private keys and self-custody and yada yada, it's important to look at some of the trade-offs made here. Let's have a look at a few negative consequences that emerge out of all this. So first of all, when it comes down to abstracting away private keys, it leads, of course, to a lack of awareness in that users may never get familiar with blockchain principles or even be aware that they do benefit from self-custody. So they might not learn what a private key is. They might never feel this empowering feeling that crypto natives enjoy about self-custody. And actually, if there's a vulnerability or anything, they might not understand why the application, the people operating the application they have been using are not able to recover their funds. So it's really important to educate users about the advantages, but also the risks of using embedded wallets. Second, as already mentioned before, there's a dependency on the provider. In this case, we discussed Privy very much. So if Privy is down, the user may temporarily not access their funds. That is, if they did not make use of the escape hatch, which is to export the private keys and go full self-custody. So users should be very much aware of that as well. Lastly, one very convenient fact when using self-custodial wallets like MetaMask, for example, is to seamlessly switch between applications within the blockchain ecosystem. Now, with embedded wallets, that is not possible because, as the name suggests, embedded wallets are locked in to one specific application. Embedded wallets really are a game changer when it comes to onboarding new users to blockchain applications. They nicely balance convenient UX with the core principles of security and self-custody. I hope you enjoyed this video. Please provide feedback, correct me on things I said, or ask questions you may have in the comment section below. Let's Get On Chain is a new content channel that aims to simplify technical topics as well as helping to guide the new wave of blockchain users on chain, and thereby do our part to bring the world on chain. So if that speaks to you and you want to collaborate in any way, or you want to suggest new content ideas, join our Discord channel. I have provided the invite link in the description below. I hope to see you there.